Good afternoon, everybody. I'm joined by Senators Klobuchar and Merkley. First, on behalf of our entire caucus, our hearts go out to Mark and Lisa and the Warner family. We know how much they loved Maddie, how much they cared for her, and this kind of loss is unfathomable. You just can't get around it. It's horrible. Okay. Anyway, let's go right to the issue here. Now, Americans want one thing now: relief. That's what Americans want right now. Lower gas, lower groceries, lower electric bills, lower costs for housing, lower costs for health care, lower costs for child care. Unfortunately, Republicans seem to have a different priority: $140 billion for ICE and Border Patrol. No reforms, no accountability, no strings attached. Let it sink in. $140 billion for ICE, $0 to lower your costs. That's these days what the Republican Party seems to stand for. Senate Republicans are choosing to follow Trump and Stephen Miller instead of the needs of the American families. Throughout reconciliation, Democrats are going to focus on cost and affordability over and over again. During Vote-A-Rama, Democrats are going to force a choice over and over again. Amendment after amendment, vote after vote, Republicans will have to decide: lower costs or let them keep rising, help families or block relief, take action or stand by while Americans struggle, stand with the American people or with Trump's unchecked enforcement machine. This should be an easy choice. Democrats have made our choice: more money in Americans' pockets. Republicans have made their choice: money for Trump's masked agents and their lawless conduct. That's their priority. Americans don't want blank checks for enforcement. They want accountability. Americans don't want shutdowns for FEMA or Coast Guard or TSA or CISA. They want those agencies funded and working. Americans don't want an endless, costly war in Iran driving up gas prices. They want it ended. Americans want relief. Republicans aren't delivering it. During reconciliation, Democrats are going to make sure the country sees the contrast loud and clear. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Schumer. Republicans are trying to use this reconciliation now to give themselves this blank check for ICE when they know the problems. They know it because Kristi Noem was fired by the president after she couldn't even answer simple questions about why a Hmong elder was pulled out of his house in Minnesota in 10 below zero weather, driven around for an hour in his underwear until they realized they had the wrong guy, or why Renee Good and why Alex Preddy were shot in the back just for exercising their constitutional rights. She couldn't answer those, she was fired. They also know the havoc that was wrought, not just in Minnesota, but across this country. So we sat down and talked to them. Leader Schumer sat down and talked to them, and finally an agreement was reached in the Senate. You're all aware of what it was. 100 senators from Bernie Sanders to Ted Cruz agreed that we should fully fund TSA, FEMA, cybersecurity, and the Coast Guard, and that border control and ICE, those negotiations could continue for reforms, or the Republicans could have figured out what to do. Passed it in the Senate, 100 senators agreed, and then it went over to the House Republicans. Chaos again ensues, and now we are where we are. So $70 billion in one committee alone for Homeland Security, as Senator Schumer points out, another 70 in another, but $70 billion. Think about what that could pay for, and that is the argument we are going to be making. Instead of $70 billion more for ICE, that could pay for 200,000 local police officers for 3 years. 200,000 local police officers who could be helping to patrol the streets, could be helping to solve rapes, could be out there going after burglars, could be out there investigating crimes and keeping our communities safe, but instead, they want to put $70 billion into ICE. ICE, with untrained people running around with 47 days of training, as a whistleblower recently told us. ICE, that there are no constraints and bounty systems that were in place. That's what they plan to do. So this is a choice. Another choice, $70 billion or 2 years of the premium tax credits extended for everyone in the country for Affordable Care Act plans. What do you think Americans would choose? Or 1 year of hearing, vision, and dental all paid for every single senior on Medicare? I wonder what Americans would choose. So that's the choices that we're going to be giving, not just our colleagues, but the country. These dollars should go toward actually helping people. That agency needs reform in a big way, but the case that we are going to be making is, how would you rather spend your money?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar.
Back in 1974, Congress passed an act with every single senator in support, saying we need to control impoundments and we need to get deficits under control. And the special mechanism that they created was called reconciliation, to be used only for deficit reduction. Fast forward 22 years from that, and Republicans did a nuclear option. And they said, hey, this can also be used to increase the deficits. Well, that was all to unleash massive tax giveaways to the richest Americans that have created massive debt for the United States going forward. And now fast forward today, and what are the Republicans doing? Starting to use reconciliation for routine appropriations. And not just to replace 1 year of appropriations, but to replace 3 years of appropriations. This is an absolute end run around the bipartisan work of the Appropriation Committee. And we have to understand the significance of that moment as it's going to play out over time. But they're not undertaking this massive violation of the norms of the Senate or the purpose of the Budget Control Act from 1974. They're not doing this to address the challenge of health care. I had the Hospital Association in today, my rural hospitals in Oregon, and our rural hospitals across the entire United States are in trouble. They're in trouble now, and they're really worried about next year when the provisions in the big, so-called Big Beautiful Bill, H.R. 1, are going to greatly reduce the revenues for rural clinics and rural hospitals. No, this violation of the norms is not being done to address the cost of housing in America. Imagine the way that we could address the housing shortage in this nation with this kind of funding. So not for health care, not for housing, not for education, not for the foundations for American families, but for secret police, for enhancing the ability to have mass roundups of dark-skinned individuals in the United States of America. The expansion of the secret police enterprise. Not one reform has been done by the Republicans. Not getting rid of the mass. Not requiring that you would have to have a warrant to knock down a door. Not stopping the unmarked uniforms or the unidentified vans. Not stopping the detainments in which individuals have extraordinary difficulty reaching a family member or reaching an attorney. This is the wrong direction for America, and think about this. They already have funded CBP and ICE. Why do I say that? Because at this moment, as I stand here right now, out of the $75 billion that was appropriated last year in H.R. 1, $63 billion of it is unobligated. Of the $65 billion that were conveyed to Customs and Border Protection last year, at this moment as I stand here, 40 billion of that is unobligated. So 63 billion, 40, that's $103 billion unobligated for this purpose, still sitting there at this moment. This is the wrong course for America. We don't need to have a situation in which costs are driven up and wars are begun. We need to instead address the foundations for families to thrive in the United States of America.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes.
Leader Schumer, thank you. There's been a lot of rumors and allegations of sexual misconduct and harassment on the House side swirling around. Senator Gallego told us he proactively met with the Senate Ethics Committee. There have been allegations swirling around him. Do you believe he has done anything inappropriate? Should he be investigated?
Well, first, I leave it up to the Ethics Committee. I haven't heard anything. Yes.
The Senate Ethics Committee is one of the most secretive committees on Capitol Hill. Unlike the House committees, we don't know who's being investigated. We don't know what they have said in answer in response to those accusations. Should the Ethics Committee be more transparent?
Look, in general, the Ethics Committee takes its responsibilities very, very seriously. I know that. But you can always do more when it comes to sexual harassment. Yes, no, I'm calling women in a row. You'll get your turn. You have to wait, though.
On DHS funding, you had wanted reforms to ICE. You're not getting them. Instead, what you're likely to get is a 3-year extension of DHS funding because they're going to go through this reconciliation process. Without the reforms and without the guardrails that you wanted, did Democrats overplay their hand here?
Not at all.
Was it the longest shutdown in DHS history? What did Americans get out of this?
The bottom line is we have said from the beginning that we will not fund ICE or Border Patrol unless there are simple, common sense reforms that Americans support. Americans aren't opposed to these reforms. Overwhelmingly, the data shows that Americans think that enforcement officers should not wear masks. They think that before you break into someone's home, there should be a warrant. They think there should be coordination with local authorities. And so the Democrats have been, and look, we're united, we're strong. They're tied in a knot. They're twisting themselves in a pretzel. They're giving us an opportunity to emphasize the #1 issue facing the American people in terms of reconciliation. So we Democrats are staunch and united in what we did. First male.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Last week, a record number of Senate Democrats voted to block arms sales to Israel. And also, recently, one of the leading Senate candidates in Michigan, Democratic candidates, said that the Israeli government was just as evil as Hamas. You have voted to continue those arms sales. Are you on the wrong side of public opinion in your party on
Look,
this issue?
our caucus is united and focused on ending the war in Iran. And that's why we're going to be voting tomorrow on Baldwin's resolution, and we're going to keep voting on those resolutions again and again and again.
On Iran,